Ilara grew up hearing whispers. These were not pleasant whispers. They weren't whispers telling bedtime stories or praising perfect school grades. Immediately comment 999, subscribe, and take the first step to protect the sacred. These were heavy, secret whispers that followed her from the echoing corridors of the sacred ground to the quiet solitude of the study room. The great anchor, the guardian of balance, the last hope. The words piled up a smothering blanket of expectation. She was 15 when she learned the cost of those words. Not in coin, but in everything else. The sanctuary was a place of high, cold stone and perfect, silent routine. It was supposed to be the safest place in the world. It was where the seers watched the threads of time, waiting for the shadows to lengthen. They found her, a child from a common village, marked by a swirl of ash on her palm that only appeared when she was scared. They declared her the vessel. Her life became a schedule of ancient texts, physical drills until her muscles screamed, and meditation. Hours and hours of sitting still, trying to find a quiet space inside her mind where the power was supposedly kept. You must be ready, Ilara, the elder, a man named Kale, would tell her, his face a web of serious wrinkles. The darkness seeks to break the world, and only you, only your light, can stop it. She believed him. How could she not? Her whole life was proof of their belief. Then came the day of the first true test. A raiding party, an outside threat. Not the big, scary darkness they always spoke of, just a band of desperate, hungry men who had found a weakness in the outer wall. It was a skirmish, nothing more. But panic hit the sanctuary. Kale pushed her out onto the parapet. Now, Ilara, focus. Draw the light. Push it out. Protect us. She was terrified. She looked down at the courtyard. One of the raiders was raising a crude torch, aiming for the hay stores. The image of the flames, the smell of smoke, it cracked something inside her. She didn't draw the light. She didn't feel anything warm or pure or golden. What she felt was a sudden, absolute, cold silence. It was like the noise of the world was switched off, and in that vacuum, a torrent of raw, unbound energy ripped itself free from her core. It didn't feel like her. It felt like a landslide happening inside her chest. She didn't push. She exploded. The raiders weren't just stopped. They weren't just stunned or knocked back. The energy wave hit them like an invisible hammer. It didn't burn them or freeze them. It simply unmade them. Their armor crumpled into dust, their weapons twisted into impossible molten knots, and their bodies were thrown against the outer wall with such force that the stone cracked like an eggshell. Silence fell again. The danger was gone. The people were safe. But then Ilara looked closer. The power hadn't stopped at the enemy. It had ripped the grass out of the earth in a 50-foot radius. The old stone fountain in the center of the courtyard, a beautiful piece of art that had stood for 2 centuries, was reduced to glittering gravel. Even the air felt thin and wrong, ozone sharp. Kale rushed to her, his face pale, but not with gratitude. It was the white-hot fear of a man who just saw a wild animal break its cage. You saved us, he managed, but his eyes were fixed on the pulverized earth, not on her. And in that moment, she knew this wasn't the light. This wasn't the heroic, focused power of a savior. This was simply destruction, and she was the trigger. They hadn't trained her to use the power. They had trained her to contain it. The chosen one was not the key to victory. The chosen one was the danger itself. The next few months were a blur of intense, fearful isolation. They moved her from the airy chamber overlooking the gardens to a room deep beneath the sanctuary, a forgotten cellar with walls made of thick, unmoving granite, carved with silencing runes. The fear in their eyes was the heaviest weight she had ever carried. She was the one who was supposed to be protected. But now, she was the one who needed to be locked away for their protection. Her training changed completely. Gone were the text about virtue and purpose. Now, it was all about nullification. You must build walls, Ilara, Kale instructed, his voice now colder, less paternal. Thicker walls in the stone around you. You must make the power sleep. But the power didn't want to sleep. It was awake now. It hummed constantly, a low, persistent vibration just behind her ribs, a hungry noise. Ilara would spend 12, 14 hours a day, sitting in that cold stone room, trying to fold her mind around the wild thing inside her. She tried to make it small. She tried to make it silent. She tried to make it go away. It was exhausting, a constant. Silent war fought entirely within her own consciousness. One morning, after a week of total failure, she slammed her hands down on the stone floor. It was a cry of pure, desperate frustration. The stone didn't crack, but the runes carved into it, runes that were hundreds of years old and meant to absorb energy, flickered and dimmed. Just from a small, angry surge, a new fear settled over her. She was not meant to fight the darkness out there. She was meant to fight the darkness in here. But what if the power wasn't a separate thing? What if it was just her amplified? What if I can't control it? She asked Kale one day, the words thick with shame. He sighed, a heavy sound that echoed in the tiny chamber. Then the prophecy fails, child, and the world falls. You are the only dam holding back the flood. If you break, the flood washes everything away. We have given you all we have. The rest is on you. The pressure was suffocating. She felt like they hadn't given her a tool to save the world. They had given her a suicide mission to save them from her. The constant demand to contain made the power inside her coil tighter, more volatile. It was like putting a lid on a boiling kettle. The steam pressure just built up. One evening, deep in meditation, she felt a shift. Not a surge of power, but a voice. It wasn't a sound. It was an idea that formed perfectly clear in the center of her mind. Why are you fighting? Illyra flinched, pulling herself out of the meditative state. She looked around the rune-covered chamber. Nothing, just cold stone and the single oil lamp. She tried to return to the silence, to the focus, but the voice, the thought, was there again, calmer this time. They are afraid of you. They are afraid of what you can do. And they have taught you to be afraid, too. This was new. The seers had always warned her the whispers of the dark, trying to trick her, to lure her out of the light. But this voice wasn't offering temptation. It was offering understanding. You broke the wall because they asked you to. You broke the fountain because they didn't teach you how to choose what to break. They taught you only one speed, all or nothing. You're wrong, Illyra whispered into the silence of the room. She was shaking slightly. Am I? The voice, the feeling. Push back. The darkness comes. They need you to defeat it. But if you are too weak to fight it, they all die. If you are strong enough to fight it, they still die. Because you cannot stop yourself from destroying them too. It was a perfect logic loop. A terrifying, true knot. If she failed, the dark won. If she succeeded, she won. But her victory would come at the cost of the very people she was meant to protect. Destroyed by the uncontrolled blast radius of her own power. Stop fighting the force. Understand it. Learn its boundaries. Learn its limits. They fear the fire. You should be learning how to use the wick. The next few months, Illyra stopped trying to build mental walls. She began to listen to the hum. She felt it move. It wasn't a bomb. It was a sea. A vast, deep, churning ocean of energy. And when she fought it, she was just a small boat in a storm. But when she stopped fighting, when she let herself sink into the feeling, she could sense its currents, its depths, its unbelievable power. The secret was not control, but coexistence. The seers still believed she was meditating, building her prison stronger. She let them believe it. Kale would check on her, his face grim. You look weary, child. The effort is straining you. I am finding the silence, elder, she would reply, a new, cold composure in her voice. A composure that was terrifyingly absent of her old fear. One night, she had to test it. She couldn't stay in the cold, silent granite box forever, simply waiting for the great threat. If she was a danger, she had to know exactly how dangerous. She had to learn the wick. The sanctuary was quiet. She slipped out, moving not with stealth, but with an absolute, unnerving stillness. She didn't need to be quiet. The power was now so perfectly muted that her footsteps made no sound at all. She walked out into nearby forest, a dark, heavy place of ancient, twisted oaks. She stopped at a clearing. She picked up a single, dry leaf that had fallen from a branch. It was brittle, delicate. Target, small as possible. She focused the feeling of the power. It surged, but this time she didn't let it explode outwards. She imagined a tiny, perfect needle made of the energy, a pinprick. She aimed it at the leaf. The power moved. It flowed through her arm, out her finger, and hit the leaf. It wasn't silent this time. It made a soft, high-pitched singing sound, like glass vibrating. The leaf didn't disintegrate. It didn't explode. Instead, a tiny, perfect circle was cut out of the center of the leaf, no bigger than her smallest fingernail. The edges of the hole were scorched black, a thin, perfect outline. The rest of the leaf remained untouched. Illyra stared at the leaf, the tiny hole, for a long time. She knelt and picked up the small, carbonized circle that had been removed. She held the leaf up to the pale moonlight. It was controlled. It was terrifyingly precise. A realization hit her harder than any physical force. The Elder and the Seers hadn't been afraid of her lack of control. They had been afraid of her potential for control. If she could be this precise, this focused, then she was no longer their tool. She was no longer just a dam waiting to break. She was a weapon that could choose its target. She started her own secret training. Every night, out in the dark forest, she used the power to gently lift a dewdrop off a spiderweb without breaking the silk. She used it to chip away only the smallest fraction of an acorn shell. She pushed it and pulled it, learned its texture, its tone, its speed. She was learning to play a musical instrument whose only note was total destruction, but she was learning the difference between a deafening blast and a perfectly struck, solitary chord. The inner voice, the danger she had feared, was now her coach. You have to know the dark to wield the light. They are two sides of the same coin. They wanted you to be pure, untouched, and therefore clumsy and predictable. The external threat, the great darkness they had warned her about, finally arrived a few months later. It was an entity of absolute cold and crushing despair, called the Void Weaver. It didn't bring fire or monstrous creatures. It brought silence that ate hope. It spread through the land, turning fields fallow, making people weary, and filling every heart with sudden, deep sense that nothing mattered. The sanctuary was ready to be the final stand. The Seers looked to Illyra, their faces worn and tired, but full of renewed, desperate hope. "The Weaver is upon us," Kale said, his voice cracking. "You must unleash the light now. Illyra, the final act. Empty yourself of it all. Destroy the source." Illyra looked at him. She saw his fear. She saw the relief that the moment was finally here, so the weight could be taken off his shoulders, win or lose. "I won't," she said simply. Kale blinked. His old eyes narrowed with sudden, sharp anger. "What did you say?" "I won't empty myself," she repeated, her voice steady. She took a step toward him. "You asked me to destroy the threat, but you also asked me to destroy myself in the process. You wanted a glorious sacrifice, Elder, not a true victory. The old ways were to trade a soul for success." She raised her hand. Kale flinched, instinctively raising his own arms to shield his face, expecting the explosion, the shattering force. Illyra didn't let it happen. She focused the power. Instead of a blast, a thin, bright thread of the energy, the smallest she had ever used in a controlled setting, flowed from her palm. It didn't target Kale. It targeted the seal of protection Kale wore on his chest, a heavy silver medallion that was meant to amplify her light. The thread of power touched the silver. There was a sound like a small bell ringing, and the medallion dissolved. Not explosively, but calmly. It simply turned to fine, useless dust. It was gone. The energy that Kale had been relying on was turned off. "That seal," Illyra explained, lowering her hand. "It wasn't a protection. It was a drain. It was designed to pull the power from me, to make sure I use it all up in one moment, ensuring there was nothing left to control or to turn against you." Kale's face was slack, his fear now mixed with terrible guilt. He had gambled and he had lost. He had tried to ensure the chosen one was only ever a desperate measure, a controlled sacrifice. Illyra didn't wait for his answer. She turned and walked out of the sanctuary, leaving the panicked Seers behind. The Void Weaver was sitting at the edge of the world, a slow, cold stain. The air grew heavier as she approached, the feeling of despair like heavy water pressing on her lungs. This was true darkness. a force that wanted everything to simply stop. She felt the sea of power inside her respond, surging, roaring against the cold silence. It wanted to fight. It wanted to unleash the glorious, destructive wave and wipe the Weaver away in a single, magnificent, world-shaking moment. But she remembered the leaf. She remembered the dewdrop. She stood before the Void Weaver, which looked less like a monster and more like a hole in reality. It didn't speak, but its thoughts, its purpose, slammed into her mind. Stop. Give up. Join the silence. You are tired. Just rest. This was a final test. The power inside her was screaming for a full release, a nuclear option. It was a desperate solution that would save the world, but shatter everything else nearby. It would be a destructive victory. Illyra reached out with her mind, focusing the sea of energy. She didn't let it explode. She forced it to wrap around the Weaver, not like a fist, but like a rope made of infinite, tightly woven threads. She focused on the precision she had learned in the forest. The power flowed out of her, but it wasn't a blast. It was a weave, a complex, intricate pattern of focused force. She was separating the Weaver, not destroying it. She was dismantling the purpose without obliterating the substance. The battle lasted hours, not in explosions and shouts, but in a silent, exhausting mental tug-of-war. The Weaver fought back with its crushing despair, trying to convince her that it was impossible, that the effort was not worth it, that she was just delaying the inevitable. You will break the world. You cannot separate the light and the destruction. They are one. No, Illyra thought, pushing the thread tighter. They are not one. They are just two different ways to use the same power. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the knot was undone. The Void Weaver didn't vanish in a flash of light. It simply collapsed. It didn't turn to dust. It retracted. The hole in reality closed up. The crushing despair lifted, leaving the air fresh and clean. The world was saved. Illyra stood there, breathing heavily. She was exhausted, drained, but perfectly intact. The power inside her was still there, a deep, warm hum, not a scream. She had used the wick. She walked back to the sanctuary. The seers were huddled, waiting for the massive explosion that would mark the end of the world, one way or the other. They were waiting for their glorious, destructive savior. But they only saw Illyra walking back, whole and calm. She told them what happened. She told them how she learned to separate the power from the destruction, how the prophecy had been right that she was a power, but wrong that it had to be an uncontrolled force. They didn't look grateful. They looked afraid. They looked at her as a person who had mastered the thing they couldn't. They looked at her and saw the greatest danger of all, the chosen one who decided she no longer needed their rules. The one who proved the only way to save the world was by defying the very people who claimed to protect it. She didn't stay. There was nothing left for her in the sanctuary. She walked away, carrying the power not as a bomb, but as a silent, terrible, and beautiful tool. She had faced the danger outside, but the real victory was embracing the danger they saw in her. She was the one, and they didn't know she was the only one who now knew how to use the danger without destroying everything in her path. The prophecy didn't make her the hero. Her decision to understand the darkness within her is what made her the true protector. So, the next time someone tells you that the chosen one is a perfect light, remember this story. The real hero is the one who understands that their destiny is a lie, who knows the power they hold is not a gift, but a responsibility heavier than any crown, and who learns how to wield the danger without becoming it. The moment she realized she was a danger, she became the only thing that could truly save them. If you want to know what Illyra did next with the most dangerous power in the world, subscribe now.